27th chapter, beginning with the 41st verse. And it reads, 27 and 41. And it reads, "And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mournings for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob." And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told Rebekah. She sent and called Jacob her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doeth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. Now therefore, my son, obey my Lord. Arise, flee thou to Laban my brother, to Haran, and tarry with him a few days, until thy brother fury turns away. If you will, this same book, the next chapter, 31, verses 26 through 29, and it reads this, in verses 31, chapter 31, through verses 21 through 29, 26 through 29, and it reads, and it says, "And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done? Thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters, as captives taken with the sword. Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and did not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with myrrh, and with songs, and with tabrets, and with harps? And thou haste not suffer me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Thou hast done foolishly in so doing. In this, it is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, take thou heed, that thou speak not good to Jacob, either good or bad." And there was one last verse I want us to look at in chapter 32. Just turn over, just to 32, verses 6 and 7. And 6 says, we're going to go 3 to 7, I'm sorry. And 3 says, "And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, and the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed with there until now. I have oxen, and asses, and flocks, and men servants, and women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord, that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels, until they obeyed. For a little while, I just want you to think with me, if you were Jacob, and if you're not, how would you summarize pretty much these things that have happened to him or happening to him at this time? And I think this phraseology, we've all said it at one time or another. And what Jacob probably was saying, if it ain't one thing, it's another. And we've said that too. When bad things have happened to us, and it seemed like they come in succession, and we start asking ourselves, now what have I done to be given this kind of bad treatment? Because I haven't been a bad person. I've been pretty good. You know, why is it that, one thing happened to me after another? And it's normally all bad stuff. And when I started thinking about it, most of the time we don't think that, or don't realize in the Bible, God told us that in this life, we're going to have tribulations. Not that we're going to, maybe. He said we're going to have tribulations, and tribulations are normally bad. And so when I started looking at that, I said, we're going to have those kind of tribulations, so why is it that we get freaked out when things basically happen to us that are bad? And so I can't understand it, but when I started looking at that a little further, it says that we look at some of God's chosen folks back then, and now I started reminiscing. I said, well, let me look and see if there's some folks in the Bible that didn't really deserve the wrong that they got done to them. And the first person that came to my mind was Joseph. And I said, why Joseph came to my mind? Well, Joseph was over there for his father to go check on his brothers, just on their welfare. When he got to them, and he went through a whole bunch to get to him, I wouldn't have done all that. But he got to his brother, and his brothers, instead of embracing him and glad to see him, they threw him in a pit with no water. And then, as I'm sure as Joseph was in the pit, he was trying to figure out, no, why didn't give me like this? But that wasn't the end of it. They took Joseph out of the pit. He probably said, oh, they've come to their senses now. But they then turned around and sell him off to a caravan going into Egypt. And what next? And so when he got into Egypt, Potiphar, an officer for Pharaoh, bought him, made him a servant. He was a servant for a little while. And you know, you start looking at one thing after another with Joseph, and he didn't deserve any of this. He was a good fellow. And it tells me then that after he was in Potiphar's house for a while, Potiphar's wife started checking him out. She liked him. And she didn't try to hit on him. And he said no. You know, he said, that was wrong with me because your husband trusts me with everything. That's including you. You know, plus it's not fair to God. She didn't want to hear that. She went and told her husband. Hebrew boy done done some wrong to us. So he threw him in jail. So he goes from a pit to a servant to a jail. Nothing, you know, he had to be asking himself the question. You know, one thing after another. What's next? What's next? And he was in jail, I'm sure, some years before they pulled him out of the jails. And then there was the other guy that everybody knew about, you know, because he had 10 children. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Never done anything. He eschewed evil. He was a perfect and upright man. Perfect meaning he was okay with God. Upright meant he was with everybody else okay. And it says that in one day he lost everything. He had everything. He had plenty of camels. He had plenty of livestock and all that kind of stuff, men and women servants and all that. He lost all of that in one day. And I would say really it was like an hour. It was one succession after another. A person come and said, hey, this person that says that you lost this. This person said you done lost that. And I'm talking about Job. Y'all know that Job was a good fellow. Now, I won't try to compete with his righteousness, and you can't either. Because Job had a righteousness that nobody could touch, you know. And he was going through what he went through because he was recommended by God to Satan. God ain't gonna recommend you or I can tell you that right now. He know you and I would be too cowardly. And we would probably back off. We wouldn't go through all that stuff Job went through. And so when we start looking at this, I want us to look at it. You know, if it ain't one thing, it's gonna always be another. And that's pretty much promised to us in the Bible. Now, I'll also throw this in. If you're truly a child of God, you're going to have extra put on you because you got extra individuals or extra situations coming against you because of Satan. You know, because Satan ain't going against his own. He's going against those that are God's. And so when I started looking at that, there was 3 things that I want us to look at. I want to look at wrongs when you do others that way, or another that way. I want to look at wrongs when others do you that way. And then I want to look at wrongs, the consequences of it. What's the consequences of wrongs? And the first thing was wrongs. What do you do when you're the one that's doing the other wrong? Well, you kind of remember when we kind of walk with it a little bit. Isaac and Rebekah had 2 sons. They had Esau and they had Isaac. Problem was, Esau's favorite was, Isaac's favorite was Esau. And Rebekah's favorite was Jacob. Jacob was a family boy, you know, and so quite naturally, it says somewhere during time, and I can tell you right now, we shouldn't be having favorites with parents. Well, we do. I got kids I like better than I like some of the other ones. You know, they're just sweeter. Some of mine are just sweet. And some of them just ain't sweet at all. And so, you know, I tend to lean toward the ones that are sweet. And, you know, they know it too. Kids know when you have favoritism among their siblings. And so it tells me, though, that during the process of time, Jacob beat Esau out of his birthright. Now, back during that time, there are two gifts that can be given to a child. And that was the birthright and the blessing. Now, the birthright basically was, you know, giving you everything over the house, in the house, and all that good stuff. Property and all of that stuff. You got all of that. The birthright was that you would be Lord over the household. That means then that the rest of the household had to make sure you had corn and wine and all these other things, whatever you needed. You know, they had to make sure of. So the first thing that Jacob does is he beat Esau out of his birthright. Then his mother comes along after she hear him talking with his father, him being Esau, and they figured out a way they're going to finagle him out of his birthright. Now, the bad thing about that was, she didn't even have to do that. Because if you go back in chapter 25, verses 23, God has spoken directly to Rebekah and told her, the older is going to serve the younger. And see, most of the time when I think about us, we buck up and we try to outdo our siblings or others, trying to get ahead and all of that, when God already has a plan and a purpose for you, but he also has provisions for you. So why is it that you want to try to break your neck, working endless hours trying to get ahead of somebody, when God already has things in store for you? That's what I can't understand, is how are we like that? And that's a role that we don't have to be worried about. Yeah. And so when I started looking at that, I said, the wrong basically that Jacob had done, quite naturally, had taken hold of him. He's 20 years he was over there with his uncle Laban. This is his mother's brother. So that was his uncle. You know, he's also become his father-in-law. And so when we start looking at that, when you start looking at wrongs that's done to others because of you, you know, the thing about that is, when wrongs are done to others by you, to you, you know, you ever met people when you be in a restaurant and they were scared to sit their back to the door, and it's normally because of how they wrong somebody, they're afraid somebody will break it in and shoot and all that stuff. You know, it's amazing, but that's the way, you know, folks that do wrong and all of that stuff, basically, they live a life scared. You know, and that doesn't make any kind of sense. Well, Jacob had to be scared all of these years. He left home running from his brother. He was scared, quite naturally, because his mama told him, he's going to kill you, son. Go spend a few days with your uncle. Now, he didn't know a few days would turn out to be a few years, but that's what happened. And when we start looking at the wrongs that we do, you know, it's hard to live a life and you done somebody wrong and you forget about it. You don't forget about the wrong that you do somebody. And in this situation here where someone else does you wrong, you want to go tit for tit and tat for tat. Well, as a Christian, you can't do that. God said, I am the revenger. So if you've done somebody wrong, even if you've done them wrong, God has said, don't you worry about that. I'll take care of it, you know, and make it right the way it's supposed to be. Now, Laban basically did Jacob wrong. You know, the big wrong most folks think is that he switched up the wives on him. He gave him Leah when Jacob had worked for Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel. You know, Rachel was pretty too. Leah was kind of sore in the eyes a little bit. I won't say she was ugly, but she was homely, I'll say. And, you know, and so Jacob not finding out that he had married Leah until the next morning, because back in those days, he arranged everything. But they had a law that said you can't marry off your older daughter So he then, that's where I think Laban pulled the trick on Jacob. You know, there's those things say you reap what you sow. I think by him switching that off was a part of that reaping what he sowed. He was sowing trickery, so he got trickery done back to him. So when I started thinking about Laban doing him wrong, Laban was just going by the law. And the law was basically saying, I can't let you have Rachel above Leah. So Jacob then had to work another 7 years for Rachel. Now he done worked all them years looking at Rachel every day, you know, but at the same thing in the back of his mind, I'm pretty sure he's thinking about the wrong he's done back home, you know. And so you have to make and deal with individuals like that. And so when I started looking at that, it starts telling me a little bit about when Laban found out, you know, Jacob said, I'm going to go home. Laban had changed his wages 10 times and done a whole bunch of other stuff. Let Jacob say, I'm going back home. And God even instructed him, go on back home, go back home. You know, that's one thing I want us to understand. Even though you're in the will of God, you're going to still have some ups and some downs. You're going to have still one thing after another happen to you in your life that you're not going to like. And it's not having anything to do with necessarily you doing wrong. You're basically saying that's just life. And life basically just says that you're going to have some ups and some downs. And it says there that when he decided he was going to go back home, God said when he would go back home, and he left. He stole out unaware to Laban. And Laban now was his father-in-law. He wasn't no longer just his uncle, this was his father-in-law as well. So when Laban was told that Jacob had fled, and you know, Jacob's camp was 3 days away from him anyway. You know, so Laban got him some men and went after Jacob. He was going to do Jacob some harm. I mean, he went out like they were thieves. And so the night before he was going to get to Jacob and deal with Jacob, God intervened. God said, you better not say nothing good or bad to that boy. And Jacob, even though he was and I just thought about this. You know, Rebecca stole the God, had a family God, that she stole and she put in her tent and sit up on him when her daddy got there. That tells me, why did Rebecca die? I always ask that question, but then it shares with me now, how good would it have looked for we serving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's wife wasn't even serving that God. You know, when you start thinking about little stuff like that, I say she was basically a wrong type of person for Jacob. That's why she died when she gave birth to Benjamin. But anyway, it goes on to share with us that when Laban met Jacob the next day, he said, you know, I had intention of doing you some harm, but God spoke to me last night and told me don't say anything good or bad to you. But you know, you've taken all of these away from me. You've taken my sons. You've taken and these were 11 boys that were born in his household. He had one girl. And he said, you've taken my sons, you've taken my daughters, you've taken my handmaids, you've taken my goods. See, back in those days, the law basically says anything that was acquired in Laban's household, basically as far as his household being his dominion that he had, you know, was his. It didn't matter that, you know, Jacob had his name on it or whatever. These were all Laban's, and Laban was in his right to say, I could come and take everything that you have. You know, and you came here naked. You came here with nothing. So you can leave with nothing. So he said, I would have done that. And you know, Jacob went to telling me, you know, I really left the way I did because I knew you wouldn't let me have nothing. You know, you're going to send me away naked as a jaybird, just like when I got here. And so when I started looking at that, I smiled. I said, you know, now all of a sudden, Jacob now confronted, running from his brother. Now he's confronted his father-in-law, running from his father-in-law. Now God tells him, now go back and face your brother. And I'm saying to Jacob, saying to himself, if it ain't one thing, it's got to be another. And I said, yeah, you got to be a little scared then, Jacob. And Jacob said, yeah, I'm scared. So he sent a caravan to his brother. And these are the consequences now of your wrongs that you do. You know, whatever wrong you do, I do believe that you reap what you sow. And it may not just be you. Sometimes it may be your descendants. It may be somebody in your family, or happen to somebody in your family. But I do think there is a repercussion for wrongs that you do to others. And in this situation here, we find that Jacob now said to his brother, shared with his brother, brother, I'm coming home. I got all this stuff and all this stuff. I've been staying with Laban, you know, your mother's brother all these years. Now I'm coming home. And Esau sent back to him, said, that's great. I'm going to come meet you. And I'm bringing 400 of my warriors with me. And, you know, that kind of scared me too. For all my 20 years, I've been thinking about the wrongs that I've done to my brother. My brother's going to get back at me. And now I'm going back to face him. And he said he's coming to face me with 400 of his warriors. I would be scared also. And he started talking to God. And God, you told me to come back home. You told me to go back there. I want to go back there. You told me to go back. And now my brother is coming here with 400 warriors. You know, he's going to wipe us out. And it tells me then that when you start looking at the consequences of the wrong that Jacob did, you would find that for 20 years now, what did he do? He lost fellowship with his father. He lost fellowship with the mother that he loved and loved him better than Esau. You know, he lost fellowship with his brother Esau. But, you know, brothers have fellowship. You know, and even you have your ups and your downs with your brothers, you still love your brother. You know, and so he had friends, I'm sure, that he had to give and leave when he left and went over to where Laban was. He had all kinds of other stuff going on when he left that he had to give up for 20 years. So those were consequences of the wrongs that he did. And it tells me then that when Laban got to him, you know, what Jacob does is he divides his family and his flocks and everything up because he figured if he come at me and he's coming forcefully, then maybe these others will get away. So he lined them up, I say, in an essence of importance. You know, he put the maid and their son, and he put them up front. You know, that was the first one that the attack would come against, would be them. Then he put Rachel and Joseph behind all of those other situations. He had Bilhah and another maid, and he had basically Leah and her sons and her daughter, and then he had Rebecca and Joseph. And then he went out front and confronted his brother, expecting, you know, bad things. But I can share with you right now. If you are a child of God, you know, it doesn't matter if you've done some wrong, and we've all done wrong from time to time. But if you've done somebody wrong, you know, it's best you to reconcile and ask for forgiveness and forgive them, or they ask them to forgive you. But you know, don't worry. If God tells you something, God will make sure it's okay. God had already touched the heart of Esau. And so when Jacob came to Esau, he was bowing and all that stuff, and Esau looked at him like he's crazy. You know, well, what is all of this? And he basically asked him about all the herds that he had sent to him and all that. And Jacob said, you know, if I just found favor with you, that you know, you're going to accept me, and you're not mad at me, you know, because I did do you wrong, bottom line, you know, and I did steal a whole bunch of stuff from you, you know. I did do a whole bunch of that. But if you accept me back, you know, then keep the things that I sent to you. And when I looked at that, I say, you know, the concessions or the things that we have to consider when we do wrong is that there are consequences that are dire. But if we got God on our side, you're going to be okay. So if you've done some wrong, which we've all done a little wrong, you know, God knows the wrong that you've done. And if you're repentant for it and God's going to make sure it's okay. So don't hold your head down because of the wrong you have. And it tells me that when Esau came to Jacob, he put his arms around Jacob and went to hugging and kissing him and all that stuff. Totally caught Jacob off guard. And Jacob was scared, thinking it was going to happen. Bad things were going to happen to his family and all the stuff that he had acquired. And quite naturally, it was God had fixed it so that wasn't going to be like that. God has fixed it in each one of our lives. The wrongs that we've done, God has fixed it. And that, whatever happens, we can understand. Jesus told us to be of good cheer, because he's overcome the world. And since we're in Jesus, we should understand that you don't have to go tit for tat. God's going to take care of you. And it doesn't matter one thing after another. It seems like it's lined up at your door, and they very well may be. Bad things just tend to happen. But understand those bad things can't take you under. They can hurt you, but they can't kill you. And you need to understand that God has got your back. And that's one of the things that I'm so thankful for, is that God is on my side. And when I started thinking about the expression, about if it ain't one thing, it's another. Because for a long time in my life, I was trying to figure it out. So I didn't figure I was a bad person. I tried to do good. I tried to help as many people as I can, but bad things tend to come my way. And I said, now why is that, Lord? I said, you're not reading my word. You can go to John 6 and 33. It says, in this world, you're going to have tribulation. It didn't say you may. And so when I started looking at all of this, don't y'all get down because bad things are happening to you. Bad things are going to happen to you. And I can share this with you. Some bad things happen to you because of who you profess. If you profess Jesus, Satan's going to get on your trail. He's going to make sure. If you're saying, ain't nothing happening to me in my life, I'm cool. You better check yourself, because if ain't nothing happening to you, that means you're on the wrong road. You're on Satan's road. And so it tells me that if you are a child of God, if you're truly a child of God, you're going to have some stuff that happens. And it's going to be, sometimes it comes in succession. It comes one after the other. So if you're going to be on this journey with Jesus, understand that some things are going to happen to you simply because you're on that road. God bless and God keep you is my prayer. Lord, I thank you right now. Thank you for the ups and the downs. I thank you for being with me regardless of which way. Continue to keep us, Lord, and bless as only you can. Touch as only you can. And we're going to forever give you the praises, Lord, because you're worthy. We thank you for everything. And we know it just seems like in this life, Lord, when we try to get ahead, we move one step forward and two steps backwards. As long as we're on your trail, we should be okay. We're going to forever give you praises, Lord, because you're worthy. We love you, Lord. You're such an awesome God. Thank you for everything and for everyone. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.